The dust was the first thing Nalinhi tasted every morning, and the last thing she felt grit against her teeth at night. It was the color of old bone, the color of the New Mexico sky when the sun had burned all the blue out of it. Here, in the arroyos, the air was still, and the heat pressed down like a physical hand, silencing everything but the buzz of a few heat-mad flies. She worked her way along the dried creed bed, her bare feet cracked and tough, but still sensitive to the sharp edges of shale. Her fingers, raw and split at the knuckles, dug into the hard-packed earth, searching for anything. A yucca root, tough and fibrous, a patch of wild onion, if any had survived the long dry spell. Even the small, quick lizards that darted between the rocks were fair game. If she could be fast enough. She was rarely fast enough anymore. A few yards away, under the pathetic shade of a withered mesquite, lay her world. Mesha. The child was wrapped in a blanket so thin it looked more like a web, its faded stripes telling a story of a different life. A dry, rasping cough cut through the silence. It was the sound that drove Nalinhi, the sound that had scraped her own soul hollow. She found a small, woody root and tore at it with her teeth, chewing the fibers into a soft pulp before walking back to her daughter. She knelt, her shadow falling over the child's face. Mesha's eyes, too large for her small, pale face, fluttered open. They were her father's eyes, the color of a summer sky, a startling blue against her light brown skin. Shoaji, Nalinhi whispered, using the name from her own people. My little one. She pressed the pulped root to the child's chapped lips. Mesha swallowed weakly, then turned her head, the cough seizing her small frame again. It was worse today, much worse. Nalinhi sat back on her heels, the weight of her failure settling over her. She looked at her daughter, half Apache, half white, and saw the ghost of the man she had loved. John. His name was a pain she still felt, like a wound that would not close. She remembered the first time she saw him, at the edge of the reservation. He had not looked at her like the other white men, the Pinda Lik Oyi, the white-eyed ones who looked with hunger or disgust. He had looked at her with a simple, quiet kindness. He was a trapper, a man who lived between worlds, and he had seen her, not as an Apache, not as a squaw, but as Nalinhi. Her people had warned her. To lie with a white man was to invite ghosts into her blanket, to poison the bloodline. Her father, a proud Chiricahua man, had turned his face from her. You are not Nede anymore, he had said, the words cutting deeper than any knife. You are Inda Ashtun, the one who lives with the white man. You are dead to us. She had chosen John anyway. She had chosen the small, bright pocket of happiness he offered. A small cabin by a creek that was, for 2 short years, a home. She had given him a child, this beautiful, blue-eyed girl who carried both their bloods. And then the settlers came. They were not soldiers. They were ranchers, men who believed the land was theirs, all of it, and that anything on it belonged to them too. They said John was a squaw man, a traitor to his own kind. They said he was stealing cattle, though he was only trapping rabbits. They came at dawn. Nalinhi had been down at the creek, washing Mesha's wraps. She heard the shouts, then the single, flat crack of a rifle. She had run, clutching her infant daughter, and hidden in the rocks, watching as they dragged him from the cabin. She watched as they threw the rope over the branch of the cottonwood tree. She watched them ride away, laughing, leaving him to twist in the morning wind. She had stayed hidden for a full day, silent, not even weeping, until the crows had come. After that, there was nowhere to go. Her people had cast her out. So, she had walked for 3 days, Mesha strapped to her back, to the small homestead of John's family, near Silver City. She had stood on their porch, holding their grandchild, and offered them the only piece of their son she had left. John's mother, a woman with a face carved from hard limestone, had looked at Mesha's brown skin and dark hair. She had looked at Nalini's Apache dress. "We don't know you," the woman had said, her voice flat. "John had no wife. He surely had no half-breed brat." She had shut the door in Nalini's face, the heavy thud of the wood sealing her fate. Abandoned by both, she belonged nowhere. She was a ghost walking between two worlds, welcome in neither. For a year, she had survived in these badlands, on the edges, living on the land's cruel charity. But the land was tired. The long drought had killed the game, withered the plants, and now it was killing her daughter. Mesha coughed again, a weak, breathless sound. Nalini touched her forehead. It was on fire. The child's eyes were dull, half-closed. There was no more time. The roots were not enough. The lizards were gone. There was only one place left, the place she had sworn she would never go, not even to starve. The Double C Ranch. It was a 5-hour walk, maybe more, to the edge of their land. It was the ranch owned by the men who had looked at her with such hatred, the same kind of men who had killed John. But she had seen the cowboys. She had watched from the ridges. They were men, and men, she knew, had certain hungers. The thought made her stomach clench with a sickness deeper than hunger. It was a betrayal of John. It was a betrayal of herself. But the sound of Mesha's breathing, thin and reedy as a broken flute, erased all pride. She picked up her daughter, wrapping the threadbare blanket tight. Mesha was lighter than she had been a month ago. A small, frail bundle of bones. Nalini stood, her own body weak from lack of food, and began to walk. She walked out of the arroyo, onto the high, flat desert. The sun was a hammer. The ground burned her feet. She did not stop. She fixed her eyes on the distant smudge of green that marked the ranch's water source and put one foot in front of the other. For hours. She was a small, dark figure moving through a vast, indifferent landscape of rock and thorn. She thought of her sister, Yazi, taken by the blue-coat soldiers years ago. She had been washing by the river, and they had come. Nalini, just a girl, had hidden in the reeds. She had heard the sounds, the laughter, and then the single shot. She had never seen her sister again. The world of men, both white and Apache, was a world of violence. Now she was walking toward it, willingly. Dusk was settling when she reached the line of cottonwoods that marked the ranch's boundary. The air smelled different here. It smelled of water, of cattle, of hay, and of the smoke from a cook fire. It smelled of life, a life she was not part of. She hid in the deepening shadows, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. Mesha was blessedly quiet, asleep or unconscious. Nalini was not sure which. Men's voices, rough and loud, carried from a bunkhouse, laughter, the clink of a bottle. She waited. She needed one. Alone. He came out of the barn, walking away from the others. He was a tall man, moving with a stiffness in one leg. He carried a bridle in one hand, and he did not walk toward the bunkhouse, but toward a small, isolated line cabin set back near the creek. She watched him. He stopped by the corral, leaning on the top rail, looking out at the horses. The fading light caught the side of his face. It was scarred, a pale, jagged line running from his temple down to his jaw. He was quiet. He seemed apart from the others, a man wrapped in his own solitude. This was the one. He looked, she thought, like a man who knew what it was to be broken. Her body trembled. She could not feel her feet. She clutched Mesha tighter and forced herself to step out from the cover of the trees. She made no sound on the soft dirt, but he sensed her. He turned, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip in a single, fluid motion. He did not draw, but his hand rested there. A promise. Nalini stopped, 10 feet away. She was close enough to see his eyes. They were gray and held no light, no warmth, just a deep, settled weariness. She swallowed, the dust in her throat making it hard to form the words. She had practiced the English words John had taught her, but now they felt foreign and clumsy in her mouth. She let the blanket fall slightly from her shoulder, a gesture she had seen the women in the saloons use in Silver City, a gesture that made her want to vomit. She held his gaze. "Please," she said, her voice a dry whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing the words out. "Please hire me, for one night." She held her breath, the shame a hot, physical thing, crawling over her skin, filling her mouth. She dropped her gaze to the ground, unable to look at him as she said the last part. "My daughter, she is very hungry." The silence that followed stretched thin and tight, like a wire. She could hear the pulse in her own ears, the distant, tinny sound of a harmonica from the bunkhouse. Boone stared at her. He did not see a woman. Not at first. The words, "Hire me," spoken in that broken, desperate voice, were a key. They unlocked a door in his mind, a door he kept bolted shut with whiskey and hard work. He was not in New Mexico in 1885. He was back in the Arizona Territory. 10 years gone. He was a cavalry scout, young and hard, and the air was thick with smoke and screaming. He smelled the burning wickiups. He heard the command, "No survivors." He saw the women and children running, their faces painted with terror. He remembered raising his rifle, following orders. The kick against his shoulder. Again and again. He remembered their faces. They looked just like this woman. Dark eyes, dark hair, a face of proud, high bones. He recoiled. It was a physical jolt, as if she had spat at him or struck him. His hand tightened on his pistol grip, his knuckles white, the scar on his face, a relic of a different, more recent fight, began to ache. "Get back," he growled, his voice thick with a past she could not see. Nalinhi flinched, pulling Mesha closer. She thought he was angry at her presence, at her offer. She had mistaken him. He was just like the others. Boone took a deep, shuddering breath, fighting the images. He forced himself to look at her, really look. She was not a ghost from his past. She was bone-thin, dressed in rags, her feet bloody, and she was holding a child. The child's head lolled, her small mouth open. The ghosts receded, leaving behind the familiar, cold ache of self-loathing. He had killed women. He had killed children, and now one stood before him, offering herself for a piece of bread. He dropped his hand from his gun, wiping his palm on his dusty jeans. He felt sick. "No," he said. The word was rough, more growl than speech. Nalini's shoulders slumped. It was over. She had shamed herself for nothing. She began to turn, to take her dying child back into the desert. "Wait." His voice stopped her. He turned his back to her, fumbled with the saddlebag on the corral rail. He pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He walked back to his cabin, a distance of 20 yards, and disappeared inside. Nalinhi waited, trembling with confusion and exhaustion. She did not know if she should run. He emerged a moment later. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. He did not, could not, meet her eyes. He was looking at the ground, at a place somewhere past her left shoulder. He thrust his hand out. In it was the bundle, a thick strip of dried jerky, and some coins, $1, maybe more. "Take this," he said. His voice was dead. "Go feed your kid." She looked at the offering, then at his face. His expression was closed, hard. "But," she started, reaching for the jerky, her hand closing over it. "The hire." "There is no hire," he snapped. The words sharp. "I ain't hiring you. Not for that, not for anything." He dropped the coins into her free hand, the metal cold against her skin. "Now go, and don't come back here. The foreman sees you. He'll set the dogs on you, or worse." He turned his back on her before she could say anything. Walking stiffly to his cabin, he slammed the door. The sound was final. Nalinhi stood for a long moment, the coins heavy in one hand, the jerky in the other. The shame was still there, but it was mixed with a confusion so deep it made her dizzy. He had refused her, he had insulted her, and he had given her food. She tucked the jerky inside her blouse, the coins into a small fold of her skirt. She looked at the closed door one last time, then turned and fled. She melted back into the shadows of the cottonwoods, a silent, retreating ghost. She ran until her lungs burned, until she was far from the ranch, her mind echoing with his harsh words. She would never see him again. She was sure of it. Inside his cabin, Boone did not light the lamp. He sat in the dark on his narrow cot, the bottle of whiskey in his hand. He had not eaten, but he felt no hunger. He pulled the cork with his teeth and took a long, burning swallow. He had spent 10 years trying to forget the things he had done in the blue coat. He had drifted, taking work on the edges of the territories, seeking out places where the past could not find him. But it always found him. It found him in the bottom of a bottle, in the dark of night. And now, it had found him in the face of an Apache widow. He remembered her voice. "My daughter is very hungry." He took another drink, the liquor burning a path down his throat. It did not burn away the image of her face, proud and shattered. It did not silence the echo of her voice, a whisper that joined the chorus of all the other ghosts that called his name in the dark. He drank until the bottle was empty, but the night offered him no peace at all. Nalinhi ran. She ran from the man, from the ranch, back into the forgiving anonymity of the dry, broken land. She did not stop until her lungs were fire and her legs were water. She found their small, hidden camp in the arroyo, a place invisible from the ridge, and collapsed by the dead fire pit. Mesha was quiet in her arms, her small body limp. Nalinhi looked at the jerky. It was dark, thick with salt and smoke. A man's food, a white man's food. It was too much. She knew it was, but it was all she had. She tore off a small piece with her teeth and chewed it until it was a soft, gray paste in her own mouth. She knelt by her daughter. "Shiaji," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Eat, just a little." She pressed the mouthful to Mesha's lips. The child stirred, her instincts taking over. She swallowed. Nalinhi's heart leaped with a desperate, painful hope. She gave her another small taste. Mesha's eyes opened, dull and unfocused, but she swallowed again. Nalinhi sat back, tears of relief cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. She had done it. She had saved her. The hope lasted 2 hours. It was just after midday when Mesha began to wail. It was not the weak cry of hunger, but a sharp, agonized scream. Her small body arched, her stomach seizing. She vomited, a violent, painful rush that splattered the blanket. Nalinhi grabbed her, frantic. "No, no, no!" The child's body was too empty, too starved. The rich, salty meat was a poison, not a cure. Mesha heaved again, and this time, Nalinhi saw it. Mixed with the dark, half-digested jerky was a terrifying, bright streak of red. Blood! The sight of it stopped Nalinhi's heart. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She had killed her. In her desperation, in her shame, she had taken the white man's food and she had poisoned her own daughter. She rocked the child, who was now limp, her breathing shallow. "I am sorry, my daughter, I am sorry," she wailed, the words torn from her, a raw sound of animal grief. She had failed John. She had failed her child. The man at the ranch had been right to refuse her. She was unclean. She was a ghost who only brought death. She did not sleep. She spent the night walking the arroyo. Mesha clutched to her chest, trying to walk away from the death that was settling on her child. By dawn, Nalinhi was hollowed out, a walking shell, numb with grief and exhaustion. She made her way to the river, the only water for miles. She had a vague, unformed thought of washing her daughter, of making her clean before. She knelt at the water's edge, but she had no strength left as she dipped her hand into the cool, muddy water. The world tilted, The sun-bleached rock spun into a blur, and the sound of the river faded. She collapsed, her body a dead weight, falling over her daughter, her arms still locked around her in a final, protective embrace. Boone woke with his mouth tasting of old whiskey and his head full of gravel. The ghosts had been loud last night. The Apache woman's face had floated in the darkness, her eyes accusing, her voice a whisper of all the other voices he had tried to silence. He cursed, pulling on his boots. He had work to do. He had to ride the south line, check for strays that might have pushed down toward the river. He saddled his mule, a stubborn gray named Goliath, and rode out, the morning sun already promising a brutal heat. He did his work mechanically, his mind not on the fences or the cattle. He was thinking about her. He had been a fool to give her the jerky. A fool to think a handful of coins could wash his hands of it. He should have given her cornmeal. He did not know what he should have done. He reached the line of cottonwoods by the river, the water a slow, brown ribbon in the heat. He was checking the bank for hoofprints when he saw the bundle of rags. His first thought was that it was a dead coyote, or perhaps she had thrown away the blanket he had given her. He dismounted, pulling his rifle from the scabbard. He did not trust this place. He walked closer, his boots silent in the soft dirt. It was her. She was face down, half in the mud, as still as a stone. The child was beneath her, invisible. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had told her not to come back. He nudged her shoulder with the rifle barrel. "Hey!" There was no response. He knelt, his knee cracking, and put his hand on her back. She was alive, but just barely. He smelled the sour sickness on her, the faint, metallic tang of blood. He pulled her back, rolling her over. Her face was gray under the dust, her lips blue and cracked. Then he saw the child. Mesha was pale as wax, her small face streaked with dried vomit and blood. "Damn it," he whispered. This was his fault, all of it. The jerky. He put 2 fingers against the child's neck. A pulse. It was there, thin as a thread. But it was there. The mother was dehydrated, the child was sick, and they were both burning with fever. He looked around. There was no one, just him in the silent, judging desert. He could ride away. He could go back to the bunkhouse. Say nothing. They would be gone by morning, taken by the heat or the coyotes. It would be simple. He looked at the child's face again. He saw the faint cast of her father's features beneath the Apache bones. He saw the child he had shot in that village, the one who had looked up at him just before he pulled the trigger. He cursed, a low, vicious sound. He could not. He holstered his rifle. He lifted Nalini first. She weighed nothing. He had handled feed sacks that were heavier. He draped her over the mule's saddle, her arms and legs dangling. Then he picked up the child. Mesha was a small, hot weight in his arms. He held her against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, and took the mule's lead. He could not ride. He had to walk, to steady the woman on the saddle. He started the long, slow walk back to his cabin, a grim procession under the white-hot eye of the sun. His cabin was a one-room shack on the far edge of the ranch, away from the bunkhouse, just the way he liked it. He laid Nalini on his own narrow cot. He put Mesha on the table, clearing away his tin plate and bottle, laying her on his only spare blanket. He got water from the barrel, his hands, clumsy and large, moving with a strange, forgotten tenderness. He started a fire in the stove, just enough to heat a little water. He tore a strip from a clean shirt and began to wipe the child's face. Nalini woke as he was touching her daughter. A sound, half scream, half groan, tore from her throat. She saw him, a large, scarred white man, looming over her child on a table. She thought he was finishing the job. She launched herself from the cot, a desperate, feral animal, and struck him. Her fist was weak, bouncing off his chest, and she collapsed against him, her legs giving way. He caught her. "Easy," he growled, pushing her back toward the cot. "She is sick. I am helping." You! Nalinhi spat, the English word thick with venom. Your food! You poisoned her! It was too rich, Boone said, his voice flat. He would not argue. He would not defend. It was the truth. She was too empty for it. She needs water, thin gruel, not jerky. He sat her on the cot and turned back to Mesha. Nalini watched, her eyes wide with hatred and fear, as he dipped the rag in the lukewarm water and squeezed a single drop onto Mesha's lips. The child's tongue moved, weakly. He did it again. For 2 days, this was their world. The small, hot cabin became a sick room. Boone moved between the cot and the table. He forced water and a thin, watery cornmeal gruel into the child. A few drops at a time. He spooned some of the same gruel into Nalinhi, who was too weak to fight him, her eyes following his every move. He slept in his chair, his hat pulled over his eyes, his pistol on his lap. Nalinhi watched him. He was not kind. His movements were rough, his voice a low growl, but he did not stop. He cleaned Mesha when she was sick. He changed the water. He kept the fire low. He was a killer. She knew it. She could see it in the way he held himself. But he was, for some reason she could not understand, keeping her daughter alive. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Mesha cried. It was not a wail of pain, but a thin, reedy cry of hunger. Nalinhi was out of the cot in an instant. She stumbled to the table and snatched her daughter up. Holding her so tight, Mesha's cry was muffled. She sank to the floor, rocking, whispering in Apache, her own tears flooding her face. Boone stood at the open door, his back to her, looking out at the corral. He gave her the moment. He rolled a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly, and lit it. She will need more gruel, he said to the sunset, without turning around. A tense, wary cohabitation began. Boone could not tell her to leave. She and the child were still too weak, and Nalinhi, for her part, had nowhere to go. She stayed, a silent, watchful presence in his cabin. They moved around each other like two animals who knew the other was dangerous. The tiny room was thick with unspoken things, with prejudice and old wounds. Boone had to work. He left them in the cabin, never sure if he would find them there when he returned. He left food, cornmeal, beans, a little flour. The first time he came back, he found the jerky he had left piled on the floor, and she was stirring a pot of bean soup over the fire. He learned to move carefully. One afternoon, he was cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on the table. Nalinhi needed to get to the water barrel, which was behind him. She reached out, her fingers barely brushing the sleeve of his shirt to let him know she was there. He moved faster than she had ever seen a man move. He spun, the rifle stock in his hand, his body coiled, his face a mask of such violence that she screamed and fell backward. His eyes were wide and blank, seeing something that was not there. It took a full 3 seconds for him to see her. He lowered the rifle, his breathing ragged. The scar on his face was a pale white. "Do not," he said, his voice a rasp. "Do not ever touch me from behind." She scrambled away, her heart pounding. She did not go near him for the rest of the day. A few nights later, the tables turned. He came in late, tired from pulling a calf from a bog. He was unbuckling his gun belt, a nightly ritual, and he slung it onto the back of the chair. He pulled the pistol from the holster, a habit, just to check the load, to wipe it down. He heard her breath stop. He looked up. Nalinhi was standing by the stove, her hands clenched. She was staring at the gun in his hand, her face a mask of such pure, cold hatred that it stopped him. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the gun as if it were a living, venomous snake. He understood. That was the tool that had murdered her husband. That had murdered her sister. Slowly, deliberately, he put the pistol back into its holster. He left the gun belt on the chair. He did not touch it again in front of her. The nights were the hardest. The desert air turned cold, but the cabin was stifling. He slept on the floor by the door, his saddle blanket his only bed. Nalinhi and Mesha had his cot. The silence was loud, broken only by Mesha's soft breathing or the scuttle of a mouse in the walls. One night, he was staring at the moonlight on the floor. Unable to sleep, he heard her whispering to Mesha in her own language. "Why did you marry him?" he asked the darkness. His voice was rough. She was silent for a long time. He thought she would not answer. "He was kind," she whispered, the English words stiff but clear. "He did not look at me, like the others. He did not see a squaw. He saw me." She paused. "He brought me a blue ribbon once, from town, for my hair." Boone said nothing. He had never bought a woman a ribbon. Another night, she was humming, a low, repetitive, deeply sad tune. "What song is that?" he asked. "It is not a song," she said, her voice flat. "It is a lament, for my sister, Yazi. She was 14 years old when the Bluecoats came." Boone flinched in the dark. "Like you," she added, her voice quiet, but it cut him like a knife. "I did not," he started. "I saw the mark on your saddle," she said. "The crossed sabers. You were a scout. You led them." He was silent. She was right. "They took her at the river," Nalinhi said, her voice hollow, as if reciting a story she had told the stars 1,000 times. "She was washing. They laughed. I hid in the reeds. I was a girl. I did nothing. I listened. And then I heard one shot. They left her in the water. My father never forgave me for hiding. He said I should have died with her." She told him about her people casting her out. "To the end day, I am Inda Ashtun, the white man's woman. I am dead to them." "And his people?" Boone asked, his voice a low rumble. "His mother," she looked at Mesha. "She said her son had no wife. She said he had no half-breed brat." Nalinhi's voice was devoid of all emotion. She shut the door. "I have no people, only Mesha." Boone absorbed this. A woman who belonged nowhere, just like him. He had the bottle of whiskey on the table a few nights later. He had earned his pay. He allowed himself 1 bottle a week. He was drinking from a tin cup when she spoke. "You hate me," she stated. It was not a question. "You hate my people." Boone looked into his cup. "I do not know what I hate anymore." He rubbed the jagged scar on his face. "You were a soldier," she pressed. "You killed us." He took a long swallow. The whiskey burned, but it did not burn away the truth. He nodded, just once. "Yes." "Why?" she whispered. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say it was war, that it was different. But her raw honesty had stripped him of his own defenses. "Orders," he said. The word was ugly in his mouth. "We rode into a camp in Arizona. They said it was a renegade camp, full of warriors who had been raiding." He stared at the cabin wall, but he was seeing the high canyons. It was old men, women, children. Their warriors were gone. Hunting, they ran." "And you shot," Nalinhi finished for him, her voice as dead as his. "We shot," he confirmed, his own voice dropping to a whisper. "The captain, he said no survivors. It is easier to follow an order than to think. When you are 18, I thought I was doing my duty. I thought I was a good soldier." "You shot women?" she asked, her voice tight, pulling the truth from him, piece by piece. "You shot children." Boone could not look at her. He stared at his own hands, the hands that held the cup, the hands that had held the rifle. "I did." The silence that fell in the cabin was absolute. It was the silence of a grave, the silence of judgment. The confession changed the air between them. It was no longer just wary. It was sharp, dangerous. A storm blew in a few nights later, a rare, violent thunderstorm that rattled the very bones of the cabin. The wind howled like a mourner. Rain lashed the thin windows. Mesha was restless, crying, sensing the fear in the air. Nalinhi was pacing the small floor, from the door to the stove, a confined animal. Boone sat at the table, trying to mend a bridle, his hands fumbling. "You think you are a good man," she suddenly spat, her voice cutting through the wind's shriek. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "You think you are good," she repeated. "Because you give me food? Because you confess? You are a killer. You are no different from the men who hung my husband." "I never said I was good," Boone said, his voice low and tight. He put the bridle down. "I am the man who is keeping you and that child from starving. That is all I am." "You keep us," she threw back, her eyes flashing. "Like pets, like prisoners. This is not a home, it is a cage, and you are my jailer." "Then leave," he roared, standing so fast his chair crashed to the floor. "Go on, take your chances. See how long you last when Duncan, the foreman, finds you. See how he treats you. Go!" "You want me to leave?" she cried, tears of rage and grief finally breaking free. "You want me to go, so you can be clean again? So you can forget what you did? You cannot. I am here. I am what you did. My sister, my husband. We are your ghosts." "You think I do not know that?" he yelled, his voice cracking. He slammed his fist on the table. "You think I sleep? I see them. Every night I see their faces. And now I see yours. The night you came here. You! He was breathing hard, standing inches from her. The small cabin was electric, filled with their shared pain and the storm's fury. "You asked me to hire you," he whispered, the words full of a terrible, ragged pain. "You, of all people, you asked me." "I did what I had to do," she whispered back, her chin high, the tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "I survive. That is all I know how to do. You kill, I survive." "And what do you call this?" he asked, his voice breaking. He gestured to the cabin, to her, to himself. "This is not surviving. This is hell. We are just two dead people in a box." "No," she said. She was not crying anymore. Her eyes were fixed on his. "I am not dead. My daughter is not dead. You did not kill us." He stared at her, at the impossible, stubborn life in her eyes, at the fury, the grief, and the pride that had not been broken. He did not know who moved first. His hand came up, the one that had held the rifle. It was trembling. He did not want to strike her. He did not want to hold her. He did not know what he wanted. His calloused, rough fingers brushed her cheek. She flinched, the same violent, instinctive recoiling that he had shown her. "Nalinhi," he said, her name. It was the first time he had said it. It felt strange in his mouth. "You are a murderer," she whispered. But the hate was gone. It was just a statement of fact, a terrible, shared truth. "I know," he said. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry, and full of all the words they could not say. It tasted of whiskey and dust and tears. His other hand tangled in her long, matted hair, pulling her head back. Her nails dug into his arms, pushing him away and pulling him closer at the exact same time. This was not love. It was not even kindness. It was need. It was two broken, jagged pieces, trying to fit together in the dark, even if it cut them both. He lifted her. She was light in his arms. He took the 2 steps to the cot and laid her down. Mesha was a small, quiet bundle, asleep against the wall, oblivious. His hands were rough, fumbling with the ties of her dress. Her hands were just as desperate, pulling at his shirt, as if she was trying to claw her way inside him, to find something human. It was hurried and raw, and it hurt. It was the opposite of the kindness she had known with John. It was a punishment and a penance and a desperate animal release. He was inside her, and for a moment, the ghosts were gone. The screaming in his head stopped. There was only the friction of skin, the heat of breath, the undeniable, violent fact of being alive. When it was over, the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the quiet sound of rain dripping from the eaves. He was still on top of her, his weight a heavy, grounding thing. A single choked sob broke from her throat, then another. She turned her face into the musty, cornhusk mattress, her shoulders shaking. She was not crying in anger. She was weeping with a despair so deep it had no sound. The quiet, hopeless sobs of the damned. Boone froze. He had done it again. He had broken. He was exactly the man she had said he was. He wanted to roll away. He wanted to run out into the rain and let it wash him clean, but he knew it would not. He wanted to say he was sorry, but the words were a lie, and they both knew it. He did nothing. He stayed. He did not pull away. He did not leave the cot. He just stayed, his heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm against her back. He listened to her weep in the dark, and he knew he was weeping with her, even if his eyes were dry. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his weight off her, but he did not leave. He lay on his side, his back to her, a tense, silent line in the darkness. He was still there when the first gray light of dawn touched the window, and she was still there, and they had not spoken a single word. The morning was born in a bruised, gray silence. The storm had washed the air clean, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick and sour. Boone had woken on the floor, his back aching, and found Nalinhi already awake. She was sitting on the cot, her back pressed to the wall, holding a sleeping Mesha. Her face was a mask, closed and blank. She had not looked at him. He had muttered something about checking the fences and fled, grabbing his hat and gun belt. He did not return for hours, not until the sun was high and hot. When he came back, she was gone. For a wild, sick moment, he thought she had left for good, taken the child and vanished back into the desert. He felt a hollow lurch in his stomach that was not hunger, a feeling he refused to name. Then he heard the faint sound of splashing. He walked toward the creek, his steps heavy. He was a fool. What had he done? He had taken the last thing she had left, her own self, and he had done it out of anger and whiskey and a pathetic, selfish need to not be the only broken thing in the room. He stopped at the line of cottonwoods, down by the water, in a shallow bend screened by willows. Nalinhi was bathing. She had her back to him, her thin cotton dress, the only one she owned, lying on a rock. She was on her knees in the shallow water, scrubbing her skin with sand, a frantic, almost violent motion. She was washing him off of her, the sight of her thin, strong back and the raw, scraping motion of her hands was a worse accusation than any words she could have spoken. He was about to turn, to leave her to her privacy, to the dignity he had already stolen, when he heard a low whistle from the ridge. Boone's head snapped up. A man was sitting on a horse, not 50 yards away, watching. It was Silas, a new hand, a man with mean, close-set eyes and a wet, loose mouth. He was not looking at Boone. He was staring at Nalinhi, a slow, ugly grin spreading across his face. Nalinhi must have heard the whistle. She froze, her hand still full of sand. She looked over her shoulder, first at the ridge, then, her eyes widening in pure terror, directly at Boone. She thought he had brought the man. She thought this was a new, worse betrayal. She snatched at her dress, scrambling to cover herself. "Silas!" Boone's voice was a roar, a sound like tearing rock. "Get your damn eyes off her, right out!" Silas's grin faltered, turning into a sneer. "Just admiring the view. Boone did not know the ranch offered such fine accommodations." "Get now," Boone said, his hand dropping to his hip. Silas looked at Boone's hand, then back at the half-naked, terrified woman in the creek. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Sure, no need to get greedy. Just did not figure you for the type." "Boone, keeping a squaw all to yourself." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dust, wheeled his horse around, and cantered back toward the bunkhouse, whistling a tinny, cheerful tune. Nalinhi was on her feet, pulling the wet dress over her head, her movements clumsy with fear. She ran from the creek, clutching Mesha's blanket, and disappeared into the brush near the cabin. Boone stood rooted, the blood pounding in his ears. He knew, with a dreadful certainty, what was coming. The word squaw, spoken with that particular mix of hunger and contempt, was a lit fuse. It took less than an hour. The bunkhouse was a quarter-mile from his cabin, but the news traveled on the wind. He was cleaning his saddle by the corral when he saw the foreman approaching. Duncan was a hard man, built thick and low to the ground. He had a gray, wiry beard and eyes the color of a winter sky. He ran the Double C for its absent owners, and he did so with an iron fist and a deep-seated hatred for two things: rustlers and Indians. He stopped 10 feet from Boone, his hands on his hips. He did not waste time on pleasantries. "Silas says you are keeping a pet." His voice was flat. Boone did not pretend to misunderstand. He continued rubbing the saddle leather, his movements slow and measured. "She is just a woman. And a kid. They were starving." "She is an Apache," Duncan stated, as if that explained everything. "This is cattle country. Boone, not a damn mission. You know the rules. No savages on the property. Especially not female savages." "She is not bothering anyone," Boone said, his voice tight. "She is bothering me," Duncan snapped. "She is bothering every man in that bunkhouse. What do you think this is? A man comes in, says Boone's got a squaw stashed at his line shack. What do you think happens next? The men get ideas. They get restless. They start thinking maybe they want to turn." Boone's hand stopped moving. He looked up, his eyes meeting Duncan's. "That will not happen." "You are damn right it will not," Duncan said, stepping closer. "Because you are getting rid of her, now, today, or I will. And my way will not be pleasant. We have a post on this ranch. Boone, a whipping post. And I have got no problem tying her to it as a lesson to any other savage bitch who thinks she can get a white man's protection." The image flared in Boone's mind. Nalinhi's back, raw and bleeding. The same back he had just seen, vulnerable in the creek. His stomach turned. "She is just a widow. Duncan, her husband was a white trapper." "A squaw man," Duncan spat. "Worse than she is, I do not care. I want her gone. Run her off. Take her to the reservation. Shoot her. I do not give a good goddamn what you do. But she is not to be here when the sun sets." Boone felt the trap close. He had no power here. He was just a hired hand, a scarred drifter. Duncan could have him fired, blacklisted, or worse, just for the argument. And if he was gone, Nalinhi and Mesha would have no one. He had to lie. The shame of it tasted like ash in his mouth. "She is leaving?" Boone said, his voice low. He forced himself to look away from Duncan, back to his saddle. "She was just resting. Her kid was sick. She is leaving tonight, heading north." Duncan stared at him for a long moment. His eyes narrowed, trying to read the truth. Finally, he nodded. "See that she does, because if I come by here tomorrow and find her, I am holding you responsible, and you know what we do to men who lie to me." He turned and walked away, his boots grinding the dust. Boone waited until the foreman was out of sight. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He felt the old, familiar self-loathing rise up, choking him. He had not stood up to the man. He had not defended her. He had done what he always did. He had cowered. He had followed orders. He stormed into the cabin. Nalinhi was in the corner, by the cold stove, packing her few things, the jerky, the coins, the threadbare blanket, into a small bundle. Mesha was strapped to her back. She had heard. "You have to go," he said, the words rough and angry. The anger aimed at himself, at Duncan, at the whole rotten world. Nalinhi did not look at him. She was tying a knot with steady fingers. "Did you hear me?" he said, his voice rising. "He is not bluffing. Duncan, he will be back. If he finds you, he will hurt you. He will hurt Mesha." She finished the knot and finally looked up at him. Her eyes were not full of fear. They were cold and clear and full of a terrible, quiet judgment. "I heard," she said, her voice flat. "So go, now. While Silas is busy running his mouth, take the creek bed. Head north. I will bring supplies. I will find you in a few days. At the Three Sisters Rocks. Do you know them?" He was babbling, desperate to fix this, to make it right. Nalinhi stood up. She was small, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the small cabin. She held his gaze. "You lied," she said. "What?" "To that man, Duncan. You lied. You said I was leaving." "I did it to protect you," he yelled. "To buy you time. What did you want me to do? Draw on him? Get us both killed?" "You did it to protect you," she said, her voice quiet, but it cut through his anger like a razor. "You are afraid of him. You are afraid of them all." The truth of it hit him, silencing his excuses. He was afraid. She took a step toward him. "I am not your squaw. I am not your pet. And I am not your prisoner." She walked past him to the cabin's single, small table. She unwrapped her bundle and took out the coins he had given her. She threw them on the table, the silver and copper scattered, ringing loudly in the small room. "And I am not your whore," she said, her voice trembling, but strong. "You did not hire me, remember?" She turned to face him, her chin high. "So I am not leaving. I am not your shame to hide. I am not your secret to run off in the dark. You brought me here. You did what you did. Now, you will look at me, and they will look at me. I stay for free." Boone stared at her, his mouth open. He had seen men stand up to Duncan. He had never seen them win. He had just seen a woman with nothing, a woman who was hunted by all sides, refused to be moved. She was not just surviving, she was fighting. He did not know what to say. He just nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. He walked to the door and pulled his hat down low. "If you are staying," he said, his voice hoarse, "you will need more beans." He left and walked to the ranch store, his mind reeling. That night, a new, unspoken treaty was drawn. He came back to find her not by the door, ready to flee, but by the stove, cooking the beans he had brought. She had found a small tin and was planting the dried beans he had left behind in the dirt outside the cabin door. They did not speak of Duncan. They did not speak of what had happened in the creek, and they did not speak of the night before. But when it grew cold, and Mesha was asleep, Nalinhi did not go to the cot. She laid her blanket on the floor, on the other side of the small, cold stove. She was not leaving, but she was not joining him either. Boone stayed on the cot. It was a silent acknowledgement. He had broken her trust, and he would have to earn it. The days that followed were quiet, and tense, and fragile. The rest of the ranch left them alone. Duncan did not return, but Boone felt their eyes. Every time he rode out, he felt the stares from the bunkhouse. He heard the sudden silence when he walked into the mess tent. He was Boone, the squaw man. He had crossed a line. Inside the cabin, their world shrank, and in that shrinking, it became something new. Nalinhi, it turned out, was a force of nature. She would not be idle. She saw the torn fabric of his life, and, thread by thread, she began to stitch it. She mended his shirts, her small, neat stitches, a stark contrast to his own clumsy repairs. She gathered wild herbs, adding them to the bland beans and cornmeal until the food had flavor, until it tasted of the earth. She took his spare blanket and washed it in the creek, far upstream, at dawn, when no one was watching, and hung it to dry. She spoke more, not in long sentences. but in small, clear statements. She pointed to his rifle. "This is dirty. It will jam." He was so stunned. He handed it to her. She cleaned it with a focused, practiced efficiency that chilled him. "My father taught me," she said, not looking up. "A tool must be ready." Slowly, he began to see her, not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as Nalinhi. He watched her with Mesha. She was a different woman with her child. She was soft and funny, her voice rising in musical Apache lullabies. He watched her hold Mesha's hand, guiding her in her first, wobbly steps outside the cabin. He found himself watching a lot. One evening, he sat on the cabin step, whittling, while Nalinhi washed Mesha's hair in a small basin. She was using a piece of yucca root, and the soft, white lather made her hands gentle. Mesha, clean and healthy, her skin golden and her blue eyes bright, laughed as her mother rubbed her scalp. A feeling he could not name, a painful, heavy thing, settled in Boone's chest. It was a longing so deep it felt like grief. This was what a home was. This was what a life was. A woman, a child, a quiet evening. Things he had long since decided he had no right to. Things he had shot and burned in other men's camps. He looked down at the piece of scrap wood in his hand. He had been whittling it into a point. He stopped. He looked at Mesha, who was now wrapped in a towel, her dark, wet hair curling. She would be walking soon, properly. She was sleeping on a pile of blankets on the floor. He began to whittle again, but with a new purpose. He was not making a point. He was smoothing an edge. The next day, he took the mule up into the hills and came back with 2 long, straight branches from a fallen piñon. He found an old, splintered packing crate behind the barn. For the next week, in the evenings, he worked. He was not a carpenter. His scarred hands were clumsy, but he worked with a patient, stubborn focus. Nalini watched him, her expression unreadable. He sanded the wood with a piece of sandstone until it was smooth, until there was no chance of a splinter. He fitted the pieces together, using pegs he carved himself, and small, precious nails he had saved. He was building a cradle. It was small and crude and a little lopsided, but it was strong. He set it near the stove, in the warmest part of the cabin. Nalinhi looked at it. She looked at him. She ran her hand along the smooth, curved rocker. She did not say thank you. She did not have to. She picked up a sleeping Mesha from the floor and laid her gently inside. The cradle rocked, just slightly. That night, when the desert cold seeped through the walls, Nalinhi did not lay her blanket by the stove. She laid it on the floor, next to his cot. He reached down in the dark, his hand out. He did not know what he was asking for. She waited a moment. Then her hand, small and warm, slipped into his. They slept like that. 2 separate broken islands, linked by a fragile, impossible bridge. He had begun to believe. He had begun to think that a man could start over, that the past could be outrun, or at least atoned for. He had begun to believe he deserved this small, stolen moment of peace. Tragedy returned, as it always did. It came riding on a lathered horse, shouting of blood. It was a young hand from the Circle K ranch, 10 miles south. He galloped into the Double C yard just after sunset, his face white with terror. "Apaches!" he screamed, sliding from his horse. "They raided us, killed Old Man Hemlock, burned the barn, took the horses." The ranch exploded. Men grabbed rifles. Duncan came running from the main house, his face a thundercloud. "How many?" Duncan demanded. "A half-dozen, maybe," the rider panted. "Young bucks, on foot. They came out of the canyons." "Why?" Duncan's voice was low. Heard talk in town," the boy stammered. "Some trappers. They found an old Apache digging roots. They shot him. For sport. Last week. This must be the revenge." Duncan's head snapped up, his eyes, cold and hard, fixed on the one. distant light in the darkness. The light from Boone's cabin. Boone was at the corral, had heard the whole thing. He felt the blood drain from his face. A cold, sick dread washed over him. He started walking, then running, back to the cabin. He burst through the door. Nalinhi was standing, Mesha on her hip, her face pale. She had heard the shouting, too. "You heard," he said. It was not a question. She nodded. "They will come for you," he said, his voice ragged. "Duncan, the others, they will blame you. They will say you told them that you are a spy."
"I know no one,"
she whispered.
"I have no people. I told you."
"It does not matter," he said, grabbing her arm. "You are Apache. They raided. That is all they need. You have to go now. For real, this time." He was frantic, pulling supplies, a bag of cornmeal, his canteen, his spare ammunition. "I will bring you. I will take you north to the mission. You will be safe there." Nalinhi pulled her arm from his grip. She was not looking at him. She was watching him. She was seeing his hands shake. She was seeing the way his eyes darted to the door, the way he kept listening for footsteps. "Take Mesha. Head for the rocks. I will hold them off," he said, grabbing his rifle. "I will tell them I am taking you to the reservation. I will lie. I will." He stopped. He saw her face. She was not afraid. Not for herself. She was looking at him with a clear, terrible pity. "You are afraid," she said, her voice a whisper. "I am afraid for you," he insisted. "No." She shook her head. A small, sad motion. "You are afraid of them. You are afraid of Duncan. You are afraid of what they will make you do." "That is not true," he shouted, but the lie was hollow in his own ears. "You are one man," she said, her voice still quiet, but it pierced his panic. "They are many. They will come. They will ask you, 'Where is the squaw?' They will have rifles. They will have a rope. And you will follow orders. You always follow orders." He had no answer, because he knew. He knew that if Duncan put a pistol to his head and demanded to know where she was, he did not know if he was strong enough to keep silent. He was afraid, with a sickness in his gut, that he would betray her, the same way he had betrayed every other woman and child in his past. "Nalinhi," he pleaded, his voice breaking. She touched his face, her hand surprisingly gentle on his scarred cheek. "You are a good man, Boone," she whispered. "But you are not a strong one. Not yet." She turned away from him. "I will go, but not with you. You will not follow. You will stay. You will tell them I ran. You will tell them you do not know where. You will be safe." "I cannot let you go alone," he said, "into the desert at night." "I am Apache," she said, the words full of a pride he had never heard from her before. "The desert is my home. It is where I am safest." She picked up her small, original bundle. She went to the cradle and, for a long moment, just looked at it. She touched the smooth wood, then gently lifted her sleeping daughter. She settled Mesha onto her back, tying her with the blanket. She walked to the door. "Do not come for me," she said. "Survive. Boone. That is what we do." She opened the door and stepped out into the black, moonless night. Boone stood in the middle of the empty cabin. The cradle, lopsided and beautiful, was empty. The small room, which had, for a few short weeks, felt like a home, was just a shack again. He was alone. He waited. He listened for the sound of Duncan's boots. He listened for the shouts of the posse, but they did not come. The night was silent, except for the sound of his own ragged breathing and the terrible, echoing silence where she had been. Boone stood in the empty cabin for a long time, the silence a physical, heavy thing. The crude, lopsided cradle was an open wound in the room, a testament to his failure. She had been right. She had looked at him and seen the coward he had always been, the man who followed orders, the man who let his fear make his choices. He had not been strong enough to stop her from leaving, and he had been too weak to go with her. The shouts from the main ranch died down, replaced by the grim, organized sounds of a posse gathering. He waited, his rifle in his hand, for the knock that was sure to come. It came an hour before dawn. Not a knock, but the thud of Duncan's boot on the door. "Boone, open up!" Boone opened the door. Duncan stood there, flanked by two other ranchers, their faces hard and shadowed in the lantern light. "Where is she?" Duncan's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Boone's mind, which had been a whirlwind of self-hatred, suddenly went cold and clear. He knew what Nalinhi had given him. By leaving, she had given him a lie he could tell. She had given him a way to be the coward she knew him to be, and in doing so, had saved them all. "She is gone," Boone said, his voice as dead as Duncan's. "Gone where?" "Ran. Took the kid and ran the moment she heard the yelling. Said she was not going to be blamed for something she did not do. She took off north, into the Badlands." Duncan studied his face, his eyes narrow slits. "You let her go?" "I did not let her do anything," Boone spat, finding a sliver of real anger. "She is Apache. She does what she wants. You cannot hold wind in your fist. Duncan, she is gone. And you just stayed here." It was an accusation. "My horse is here, my pay is here, my job is here. She was temporary." The word felt like swallowing glass. Duncan held his gaze for another long, heavy moment. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "Fine, she is probably halfway to the reservation by now. Or lizard food. Either way, she is off Double C land. Keep it that way." He turned. "We are riding for the Circle K. See if we can cut a trail on those bucks." He and his men disappeared into the darkness. Boone shut the door. He stood in the dark, listening to the posse ride out, their hoofbeats fading to the south. They were riding in the wrong direction. Nalinhi had said she was going north. He looked at the empty cradle. "You are a good man, Boone, but you are not a strong one. Not yet." Her words were a judgment. But maybe, he thought, they were also a question. He did not know how long he stood there, but the gray, pre-dawn light found him not on his cot, but by the corral, saddling Goliath. He was not a strong man. He knew that. He had a lifetime of proof. But as he cinched the saddle, his hands steady, he knew one thing. He could not be the man she thought he was. He would not. He packed what was left. Water, cornmeal, his ammunition. He tied the cradle, his crude, hopeful piece of work, to the back of the saddle. He would not leave it behind. He put his foot in the stirrup and pointed the mule north. He was riding after her. He was not just riding into the desert, he was riding into the Mimbres Sinks, a stretch of land so notoriously cruel that even the Apaches, who knew the desert, treated it with respect. It was a place of alkali flats that could blind a man by noon, hidden pockets of quicksand that could swallow a horse, and sheer canyons that were known hideouts for outlaws, deserters, and men even more broken than Boone himself. This was Nalinhi's home. She had said it, but he knew, as he rode, that she was weak. She was on foot, carrying a child. She had no water, no food, and only a few hours' head start. He was a scout. He had been one of the best. He had been paid to see the unseen, to read the story left in a bent blade of grass or a scuffed pebble. But this was different. He was not hunting. He was following. He was trying to find the one person in the world who had seen him for exactly what he was, and had not, in the end, cursed him for it. He found her trail by mid-morning. It was just as he feared. Her barefoot prints, small and shallow, alongside the telltale, stumbling marks of a child just learning to walk. She had let Mesha walk, to spare her own arms. The trail was heartbreakingly slow, heartbreakingly clear. She was not moving fast. She was trying to conserve strength. He pushed Goliath hard. The sun was a physical weight. The land was a bleached bone white, shimmering in the heat. He passed a place where she had stopped. A small, dark stain in the dust. He knelt. He did not need to taste it to know it was blood. Her feet were cut. His jaw tightened. He mounted and rode on, his fear a cold knot in his gut. He rode for a full day, the sun burning his neck, his own canteen getting dangerously light. He followed her tracks through a narrow, winding canyon, the walls rising up, red and silent. This was outlaw country. He could feel the eyes on him, the unseen watchers. He kept his rifle in his lap. He lost her trail at sunset, the rock of a dry riverbed giving no sign. He made a cold camp, eating a handful of dry cornmeal, his ears straining in the darkness. He thought he heard a child's cry, once, faint and far, but he told himself it was just a night bird. He did not sleep. At dawn, he found the trail again, and it was no longer just hers. Alongside her small, bloody footprints was the massive, booted print of a white man and the tracks of a shod horse. Boone's blood went cold. The tracks were heavy, the man's steps deep. He was leading the horse. He was with her. Had she been caught? The tracks told a confused story. Her steps were frantic, stumbling. Then they would stop. His steps were steady. They had moved off the main trail, up a smaller, box canyon. Boone dismounted, pulling his rifle. He tied Goliath to a scrub brush and moved forward on foot, his scout's training taking over. He moved like a ghost, silent, his eyes scanning the rocks above. He smelled the smoke first, a small, green wood fire, choking and bitter. Then he heard the voice, a man's voice, rough and thick with drink. "And just be nice, little gal. Old Jedrick, he ain't gonna hurt you, not much. Just lonely, see? A man gets lonely out here. And a pretty little thing like you, gotta be friendlier." Boone eased himself over a rise. He saw the camp. It was a fur trapper, big as a bear, dressed in greasy, rotting hides. His horse was tethered nearby, and he had Nalinhi. She was backed against the canyon wall, her face a mask of terror and fury. Mesha was on the ground a few feet away, crying, huddled into a small, terrified ball. The trapper, a large skinning knife on his belt and a whiskey bottle in his hand, was blocking her only exit. He stank of liquor and old sweat, the smell carrying even to Boone. "Now, come on," the trapper, Jedrick, was saying. He took a swig from the bottle and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. "I gave you jerky. I gave the little brat water. You owe me. A man provides. A woman. She provides. 2. That is the law out here."
"No,"
Nalinhi whispered, her voice hoarse.
"Please, we go."
"Go? You ain't going nowhere." He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. He set the bottle down and lunged, grabbing her arm. "You are gonna stay right here and be sweet to old Jedrick." Nalinhi screamed. She had a rock in her free hand, and she brought it down on his wrist. He roared in pain and backhanded her, sending her sprawling into the dust. Boone had seen enough. He did not shout a warning. He did not call the man out. He did not think. He just acted. He was back in the Arizona territory. He was the man with the rifle, the man with the power of life and death. He saw a monster hurting a woman, and he reverted to the only thing he knew that worked. He raised his rifle. He sighted. The trapper was turning, pulling his knife, his face dark with rage, ready to finish what he had started. Boone fired. The shot was a single, flat, deafening crack that echoed off the canyon walls, scattering birds for a mile. The trapper stopped. He looked down at his own chest, at the dark, spreading stain, with a look of profound, almost comical surprise. He tried to say something, but only a bloody cough came out. He crumpled to his knees, and then fell forward, face down in the dust of his own fire, his knife skittering away. The silence that rushed in was absolute. broken only by Mesha's high-pitched, terrified screams. Nalini was on the ground, her hands over her head, her body trembling. Boone stood up. The rifle was still hot in his hands. The smell of gunpowder, his old, familiar perfume, filling his nostrils. He had just killed a man. He had done it without hesitation, without mercy. He had become the very thing he swore he would never be again. He walked down into the small camp. His boots were heavy. Mesha was screaming, reaching for her mother. Nalini slowly lowered her hands. She looked at the dead trapper. Then she looked at Boone, his face a hard, scarred mask, the rifle smoking in his hand. He reached a hand down to her. Nalini. She did not take his hand. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wild. She looked at him, at the dead man, at her crying child. She was breathing in short, gasping sobs. She had run from one killer, only to be saved by another. She hauled back her hand, and she slapped him. She slapped him with all the force of her terror, her rage, her exhaustion, and her shame. The sound was as sharp as the rifle shot.
You!
She screamed, her voice breaking.
You came! Why did you come? I told you to stay! I told you to be safe!
She was not angry that he had killed. She was angry that he had come, that he had risked himself, that he had undone her sacrifice. And then the slap, the scream, the last of her strength was gone. Her knees buckled. The anger that had held her together dissolved, and she was just a woman, exhausted and terrified, who had just watched a man die for her. She fell forward, not in a faint, but in a collapse. Boone caught her. He dropped the rifle and his arms went around her, pulling her against his chest. She was shaking so violently he could feel it in his own bones. She buried her face in his dusty, sweat-soaked shirt, and she began to sob. Not the quiet, despairing weeping of the cabin, but a storm of grief and guilt and a terrible, wrenching relief. He held her. He just stood there, in the silence of the canyon, with a dead man at his feet, and he held her. Mesha was still crying. Boone, with Nalini clinging to him with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, bent down. He scooped up the crying child, tucking her into the space between them. He held them both. His two hands, which had just taken a life, were now holding his whole world. He stood there, his own eyes closed, his face buried in Nalini's matted hair, and for the first time in 10 years, he did not feel the ghosts. He just felt the weight. He did not let them go for a long, long time. They could not stay. The shot would echo. It might draw others. Worse than Yedrick. Boone was gentle, his voice a low rumble. We have to go. I know a place. It is safe. She was too weak to walk, too shaken. He cleaned the blood from her face with water from the trapper's canteen. He ripped a strip from the trapper's blanket and bound her cut feet. He did not look at the dead man. He was just a resource now. He took the man's horse, his water, his jerky, and his ammunition. He did not feel a shred of guilt. He put Nalini and Mesha on the trapper's horse, and he led them on his mule. Deeper into the canyons. He left the cradle. He could not carry it and lead the horse. It pained him, but it was a luxury. Survival was not. He led them for hours, into a part of the desert he had only seen once, a place of high, sheer-walled mesas. He led them to a crack in a wall, a trail so narrow they had to go single file. It opened up into a small, hidden valley, and in the center of it, crumbling and beautiful, were the ruins of an old Spanish mission. The roof was gone from the main church, but the priests' quarters, built of thick adobe, were still intact. It was hidden, it was defensible, and it had a small, reliable spring seeping from the rock. It was a sanctuary. They were safe. For 2 days, they did nothing but heal. The abandoned mission was a quiet, holy place. The silence was deep, broken only by the wind whistling through the empty bell tower. They were both wounded, in different ways. Her feet were badly cut, and the trapper had bruised her face. Boone's wound was the old one, the one in his soul, which the rifle shot had torn open again. He nursed her. He sat her on a low stone wall, and he washed her feet, his large, rough hands moving with a tenderness that made her want to weep. He cleaned the cuts and wrapped them in clean cloth. He did not speak. She, in turn, nursed him. She saw the way he sat, staring at his own hands, the rifle always just out of reach. She saw him flinch at the sound of a rock falling from the crumbling walls. That night, they sat by a small, smokeless fire inside the adobe room. Mesha was asleep on Boone's saddle blanket, clutching a small wooden doll Nalinhi had made for her from twigs. He gave us water," Nalinhi whispered, staring into the fire. "The trapper, he found us. She was crying. He gave us water and jerky, and I thought he was kind. Like John." She looked at Boone, her eyes full of a terrible, old grief. "There are no kind men, only men who want something." "I am not kind," Boone said, his voice rough. "I did not kill him because he was hurting you. I killed him because it was easy. It was what I am good at." "You are not," she said, her voice firm. She moved from her side of the fire and sat next to him, her shoulder pressing against his. "You are good at this." She pointed to her bandaged feet. "You are good at the cradle. You are good at holding Mesha. The killing, that is the ghost. That is not you." He looked at her fierce, unwavering belief. He, who had no belief in himself. "I was so afraid," he confessed, the words torn from him. "When you left, I was afraid of Duncan. I was afraid of them. But I was more afraid of you being right, that I was a coward." "You are not a coward," she said. "A coward would have stayed at the ranch. A coward would not be here. A coward would not have come for us." He held her hand. It was no longer a fragile bridge. It was an anchor. They made love that night. It was not the desperate, angry collision of the cabin. It was a slow, quiet, almost reverent rediscovery. It was slow, and it was trusting. It was two people who had seen the absolute worst of the world, and the absolute worst in each other, and had decided to stay. It was a kiss that was about comfort, and hands that were about healing. It was a promise, made in the dark, in a holy, ruined place. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blanket. The fire burned down to embers. Mesha was a soft, warm weight sleeping beside them. Nalinhi was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I wanted you that night." Boone turned his head. "What, in the cabin?" "No," she shook her head. "The first night? The night I came to the ranch." He was confused. You were starving. You were desperate." "I was," she agreed. "But I had seen other cowboys, from the ridges. They were loud, and they looked like the men who killed John. But I watched you. You were alone. You were by the corral. And you looked as broken as I felt. Your face, your scar." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. "I was starving. I needed money for Mesha. But when I chose you, it was not just for hire. I do not know what it was. I saw you, and I thought, he is like me. He is a ghost, too." She gave a small, sad laugh. "I wanted you, Boone, even before I asked. The words, hire me. They were just the only English I had for it, the only way I knew how to ask for help, for you." Boone's heart, which he had thought was a dead, hard thing, seemed to crack, all his guilt, all his shame about that first night, about her offer. He had misunderstood. He had seen a whore, because that is what the world had taught him to see. She had seen a fellow soul. He pulled her closer. his arms a tight, protective band around her and the child. He finally understood. He was not her killer. He was not her savior. He was just hers. "We are leaving," he said, his voice firm, full of a new, hard certainty. "We are not going back. We are not going north to the reservation. We are leaving New Mexico." She looked up at him. "We will go west," he said, his mind racing, a plan forming. "Toward Colorado. It is new country, high country. No one knows us there. No one knows my face, or yours. We can find land. We can build a cabin. A real one." "Colorado," she whispered, the name foreign and full of promise. "I will be your husband," he said, the words feeling right and true. "I will be Mesha's father. We will be a family. We will start again. We will be free." She did not say yes. She just kissed him, a kiss that was a vow. For the first time, Boone felt a flicker of something he had not felt since he was a boy. He felt hope. They stayed in the mission for one more day, gathering strength, making real plans. He would take them. They would follow the high ridges, travel at night, until they were clear of the territory. As they were preparing to leave, the sun just beginning to dip behind the high canyon walls, Boone was packing the mule. Nalinhi was strapping Mesha to her back. A voice, hard and familiar, shattered the sacred quiet. Well, Boone, I knew you were a liar. I just did not know you were a fool." Boone spun, his rifle in his hand. They were surrounded. Duncan was standing on the ridge above them, a rifle cradled in his arms. He was not alone. Silas was there, and 4 other ranchers from the Double C, their faces hard, their rifles all aimed at the small family in the ruins. "We just came to find our dead trapper," Duncan called down, his voice laced with cold satisfaction. "Looks like we found his killer, too, and the bitch who started it all." The world was suddenly terribly still. The air, which had been full of the wind's quiet whistle, now seemed to hold its breath. 6 rifles, dark and metallic, glinted on the ridge. 6 men, their faces hard as the rock they stood on, stared down at them. Boone's hand was on his rifle, but he did not lift it. Nalinhi was frozen behind him, her body a shield in front of the ruin's dark doorway, where Mesha was. "You have got nowhere to run, Boone!" Duncan's voice echoed, unnaturally loud in the small, enclosed valley. "You lied to me. You harbored a savage, and now you have gone and killed a white man." He gestured to the trapper's horse, still tied to Boone's mule. "We followed his sign, figured you were long gone, but you are just as stupid as you are treasonous." Boone looked at Nalinhi. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry, burning with a cold fire. She was not looking at Duncan. She was looking at Boone, waiting. "You are a good man, Boone, but you are not a strong one. Not yet." This was it. This was the moment. He was not a soldier. He was not a coward. He was a man with a family. "Nalinhi," he said, his voice low, not turning. "Take Mesha. Go deep inside. Find the old cellar we saw. Bar the door. If you can, do not come out, no matter what you hear." "Boone," she whispered, her hand clutching his shirt. "Go, now," he commanded, his voice holding a new, hard authority he had never possessed before. "I will handle this." She hesitated, then looked at the rifles on the ridge. She knew. She kissed his arm, a quick, desperate press of her lips, then grabbed Mesha from the doorway. "Shi Aji, we play a game. We hide." She disappeared into the blackness of the ruins. Boone was alone. He turned to face the ridge. He laid his rifle on the ground, in the dust, and slowly, deliberately, raised his hands to his shoulders. "Duncan!" he shouted. "What?" the foreman's voice barked back. "This is not your fight. It is mine. Let me and the woman ride out. We will be gone from this territory by morning. You will never see us again. No one else needs to get hurt." He was offering to leave. He was offering peace. It was the last, desperate hope of a man who did not want to use the gun in his hand. There was a long silence, then a low, ugly laugh. It was Silas. "He is begging! Boss, the squaw man is begging!" Duncan stepped forward, his rifle still cradled. "Oh, you will be leaving. Boone, you will be leaving in a pine box, but we will take our time with you. First, you are going to send her out." "She has done nothing," Boone said, his hand still up, his voice steady. "She is an Apache!" Duncan roared, his voice cracking with fury. "She is a disease. She is the reason Hemlock is dead. She is the reason Jedrek is dead. She is a savage, and she has poisoned you. Now send her out. We mean to have our justice. We will not let a savage run loose with a white man's brat." The words, "a white man's brat." The world snapped into a cold, clear focus for Boone. He had spent his life running from ghosts, haunted by the women and children he had failed to protect. He had followed orders and let his soul be damned for it. Now, a man was giving him another order, an order to sacrifice the woman he loved and the child he was finally learning to call his own. He slowly, calmly lowered his hands. "No," he said. The word was quiet. It was not a shout. It was not a threat. It was a simple, final fact. It was the answer to Nalini's question. Duncan's face darkened. "That is your last word, traitor?" Boone said nothing. He bent, his movement fluid, and his hand closed around the stock of his rifle. "Silas, wing him!" Duncan commanded. The first shot was not from Silas. It was from Boone. He had been a scout. He had lived by his rifle. He did not aim to wing. He did not aim to warn. He aimed for the man who was laughing. He fired. The rifle kicked hard against his shoulder. On the ridge. Silas grabbed his chest, a look of pure shock on his face, and toppled backward out of sight. All hell broke loose. The world erupted in smoke and thunder. 4 rifles fired at once, the bullets chipping stone and dirt all around Boone. He was already moving, diving backward into the cover of the mission's crumbling doorway. A hot, searing pain tore through his left side, a fire that stole his breath and sent him sprawling onto the stone floor. He cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound. He was hit. He landed hard, the rifle skittering away from him in the darkness. He tried to push himself up, but his left arm was useless, and his side was a sheet of wet, blinding fire. He could feel the blood, hot and fast, soaking his shirt. "Boone!" Nalini's scream echoed from deeper in the ruins. "I am fine," he lied, gritting his teeth. "Stay back. Stay with Mesha." Outside, the shooting stopped. There was a moment of shocked silence. "He got Silas," a voice yelled. "The bastard killed Silas." "He is hit," Duncan's voice roared. "He is in the church. Flush him out. Johnson, you and Miles go around the back. We will trap him in there." Boone heard their boots on the gravel, scrambling. He was trapped. He was bleeding. He looked at his hand, covered in his own dark blood. He was going to die here, in the dust of a ruined church. Then, a shadow moved in the darkness. It was Nalini. Her face was a pale, fierce mask. She was not looking at him. She was looking at his rifle, lying in the dust a few feet away. "No, Nalini, stay back!" he gasped, trying to crawl. She ignored him. She moved like a phantom, her bare feet silent on the stone. She snatched the rifle. She checked the load, her hands sure and practiced, just as her father had taught her. She grabbed the box of cartridges from his belt as she passed. "Where is Mesha?" he panted, his vision starting to swim. "In the cellar, under the stones. She is hidden. She is quiet." Her voice was a low, guttural whisper. "You killed for us. Now I fight for us." Before he could protest, she was gone. She did not run to the front door. where they expected her. She climbed. She moved like the Apache she was, scaling the half-fallen wall of the choir loft, a place that gave her a view of the mission's front and side. She was a ghost in the shadows, a hunter. "Johnson, you see anything?" Duncan yelled from outside. A rancher, Johnson, was creeping around the side of the mission, his rifle ready. "Nothing. I think he is bleeding out. I'm going to—" A single shot, the same flat, heavy crack of Boone's rifle. Johnson screamed, a high, thin sound, and grabbed his leg, falling into the open. "Where did that come from?" a man yelled in panic. "It is the squaw!" Duncan's voice was full of disbelief and rage. "The bitch has his gun! Get cover! She is in the loft!" Rifles spat fire at the choir loft, but Nalinhi was not there. She had fired and moved, a tactic her people had perfected. She was now at a side window, a narrow slit in the adobe. She fired again. A bullet pinged off the rock just above Duncan's head, sending him scrambling for cover. She was holding them off. One woman, with one rifle, was holding back 5 grown men. "She is just one woman," Duncan raged. "Burn her out. Get the brush. Get the oil from the saddlebags. We are burning the place. We will burn them both." Boone heard him. He tried to stand, but his legs were jelly. The pool of blood beneath him was growing. "Nalinhi," he called, his voice weak. He is going to fire." "He will try." Her voice came from the darkness above, calm and cold. "Be quiet. Boone, you are losing too much blood. Stay awake." He heard the men gathering brush, cursing and shouting. He heard Duncan encouraging them. This was it. This was how it ended. Smoked out and burned, like animals. He thought of Nalinhi, of Mesha, their skin. He would not let it happen. He began to crawl toward the door, dragging his rifle, the one she had left him. The trappers. He had to draw their fire. He had to give her a chance. He was halfway to the door when he heard a new sound. Hoofbeats, many, and a new voice, a loud, official one that cut through the chaos like a whip. "In the name of the law, cease fire! Drop your weapons! This is Sheriff Miller!" The sound of men gathering brush stopped. Boone collapsed against a pillar, his breath coming in ragged, painful sighs. "Sheriff?" Duncan's voice was choked with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Boone could hear the jingle of spurs, the creak of leather, as several men dismounted. "I heard a damned war," the sheriff's voice boomed. He sounded old and tired and deeply annoyed. "I was 2 miles down the canyon, trailing those rustlers from the Circle K, and I hear a half-dozen rifles. I ride up, and I find you, Duncan, and your men, laying siege to a church like a common lynch mob. What in the blue-eyed hell is going on?" "Sheriff, this is ranch business," Duncan said, his voice lowering, trying to regain control. "We caught the man who killed Silas, and the squaw who helped him. They killed Jedrick, too." "Is that so?" the sheriff said. He walked into the mission yard. Boone could see his shadow, a tall, broad man with a star gleaming on his vest. "All I see is you and your men trying to burn down a mission with a woman inside. That is not justice. Duncan, that is a lynching, and I will not have it in my county. This is an illegal posse. You are all under arrest." "Arrest?" Duncan's voice was outraged. "You are arresting us? They are the murderers." "They are my prisoners," the sheriff said, his voice iron. "I will take them. They will stand trial. The right way, now. Back off, or I will add resisting arrest to your long list of problems." There was a long, tense silence. Boone could hear the ranchers muttering. "You heard me. Duncan, back off. My deputies have their rifles on you." Slowly, Boone heard the sound of rifles being lowered. "Now, son," the sheriff's voice was softer, calling into the church. "You in there? You hit?" "I am hit," Boone gasped, the words barely audible. "Nalinhi," he whispered. It is the law. Come down. Slowly. Nalini's shadow emerged from the loft. She was still holding the rifle. She walked into the shaft of sunlight from the missing roof, her face covered in dust and gunpowder, her eyes fierce. She looked like an avenging angel. She walked to Boone and knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his bleeding side. The sheriff stepped into the doorway, his pistol in his hand. He was an older man, with a face like a worn-out boot and clear, honest eyes. He took in the scene. Boone, bleeding on the floor. Nalini holding the rifle, the dead rancher outside. "Sweet Mary," he whispered. He holstered his pistol. "All right, let's get you out of here. Both of you." He turned. "Duncan, you and your men will ride back to town. You will be in my office at sunup. All of you. If you are not, I will come for you, and I will bring warrants for attempted murder." Duncan glared, but the fight was gone. He had lost. He spat on the ground, then turned, motioning to his men to pick up Silas's body. They rode out without a word. The sheriff knelt by Boone. "That is a bad one. Son, we need to get you to the dock." "No," Boone gasped. "No dock, no town. Duncan, he will not let this go." The sheriff looked at Nalini, then at Boone. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You are probably right. A lynch mob. Once it gets a taste, does not just go home. They will be back, law or no law." He looked at his deputy. "Get him on a horse. We are taking them in." They took them to the small, dusty town of Silver Creek, a 2-hour ride. Boone was tied to the saddle, half conscious, the sheriff's deputy pressing a bandage to his side. Nalini rode the trapper's horse, Mesha, wide-eyed and silent, clutched in her arms. They were not taken to the doctor. They were taken to the back of the sheriff's office, to a small, dark cell that smelled of stale sweat and regret. It was, the sheriff had said, the only place he could guarantee they would not be found and dragged out by Duncan's men. It was protective custody. A doctor, a drunk, tired man, came and went. He dug the bullet out of Boone's side, a raw, burning agony. He stitched the wound with clumsy, thick fingers and poured whiskey over it. "He will live," the doctor grunted, "if the fever does not take him, or the rope." The sheriff returned late that night. He brought a tray with a bowl of stew, some bread, and 2 cups of water. He put it through the bars. Nalini, who had been sitting on the floor, holding Boone's hand while he drifted in a haze of pain, had not touched it. "You have to eat," the sheriff said. "What now?" Nalini asked, her voice flat. The sheriff sighed. He sat on his desk, his back to them. "Now, you are in a bad spot. Duncan is riling up the town. He says you are a killer, and she is a savage spy. He wants a hanging. I can hold him off. For a day, maybe 2, but this town, they listen to the ranchers. They have the money. We did not start it." Nalini whispered. "I know, ma'am," the sheriff said, his voice tired. "I saw the tracks at the trapper's camp. I saw how he grabbed you. I know you shot Johnson in self-defense. And Boone, well, Silas was a known troublemaker. But it does not matter. He was white. You are not. And Boone, he chose his side." He was silent for a moment. "I cannot legally let you go, and I cannot legally hold you. If I keep you here, Duncan will have a mob here by dawn, and they will tear my jail down. If I let you go, I am breaking the law." "So what do you do?" Boone's voice was a hoarse whisper from the cot. The sheriff stood up. He walked to the cell door. He pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. "What I am doing," he said, "is I am going to my front office, and I am going to drink a cup of coffee, and I am going to fall asleep. My deputy, he is out on patrol. He will not be back for, 3, 4 hours." He unlocked the cell door. He pushed it open, a wide, dark gap. "My office is a mess. I might be asleep for a long time. There are 2 horses, My best too, saddled and ready in the stable out back. They have supplies, food, water, ammunition. Enough to get to Colorado. I would take it as a personal favor, the sheriff said, not looking at them. When I wake up, this cell was empty, and my horses were gone. I hate this town. He walked out of the back room, leaving the door, and the way to freedom open. Nalinhi stared at the open doorway. She looked at Boone. He was pale, sweating, his shirt soaked with fresh blood. "We have to go," she whispered, pulling him up. "Nalinhi, wait!" He gritted his teeth, the pain making him dizzy. He gripped her arms, his hands shaking. He looked at her, his eyes burning with fever and a terrible, new clarity. "Nalinhi," he panted. I have to say it. I do not know if I will make it, but I have to say it." "Be quiet, Boone. You are strong. We will go," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "No, listen," he insisted, his voice raw. "That cradle, I built it. I built it for her. For Mesha. Because I want her. I want to be her father." He was crying now, the tears he had never shed, the ones for the ghosts, for his own broken life. "I do not know how. I am a killer. I am a drifter. I am nothing. But I want to be her father. And I want to be yours, too, if you will let me, if you will have me." It was the confession of a broken man, a man who had finally found the one thing he was not willing to lose. Nalinhi's tears spilled over. She put her dusty, trembling hands on his face, on his scar, on the face she had once feared. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, or of grief. It was a kiss of absolute certainty. It was the kiss of a wife. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his. "You already are," she whispered. The cell door was a black, open square, a promise that felt like a trap. Boone, leaning on Nalinhi, stumbled into the alleyway, his breath a ragged, wet sound in the cold night. His side was a raw, searing fire, the sheriff's bandage already soaked. "I can walk," he lied, his knees buckling. "You will not," Nalinhi said, her voice a steel wire. She took more of his weight, her small frame impossibly strong. Mesha was a silent, watchful bundle on her back, her eyes wide in the moonlight. The stable was dark and smelled of hay and horses. The sheriff had been true to his word. 2 horses, the best in the stable, stood saddled, a bay and a dark roan. Saddlebags were full, heavy with food, a full canteen, and the unmistakable, solid weight of ammunition. "He is a good man," Boone whispered, his head swimming. "He is a tired man," Nalinhi corrected, her voice all business. "He is not a strong one. He just gave us his horses. We must not fail him." She got Boone onto the bay, a difficult, painful process that left him gray-faced and trembling, his teeth chattering. She tied his hands to the pommel, loosely, just enough to keep him from falling if he passed out. Then she mounted the roan, settling Mesha in front of her, and took the reins of Boone's horse. She did not look back at the town. She did not look at the jail. She pointed the horses west toward the black, jagged line of the mountains that marked the edge of the territory, and she kicked the roan into a steady, ground-eating trot. They rode for the rest of the night, a desperate, silent flight. They rode through rock-strewn passes and down dry, sandy arroyos, the moon their only guide. Nalinhi did not slow. She knew Duncan. She knew men like him. Their pride was a fire that needed to be fed, and a sheriff's order would not stop them. Not for long. They would come. By dawn, Boone was delirious. He was muttering, his head lolling. He spoke of the blue-coat cavalry, of the smoke in the canyons, of his ghosts. Nalinhi found a small, hidden cave, a crack in a mesa wall, and she pulled him from the horse. She spent the day in that darkness, her terror a cold, hard stone in her gut. She had lost one husband to men like Duncan. She would not lose another. She cleaned his wound as best she knew, using whiskey from a small flask in the saddlebags, a brutal, agonizing process that made Boone scream and then pass out. It was a mercy. She tore strips from her own skirt, the only spare cloth she had, and bound him tightly. She sat in the dark, Mesha in her lap, her hand on Boone's chest, feeling the too fast, feverish beat of his heart. She did not sleep. For 3 weeks, this was their life. They traveled by night, a slow, painful crawl. They hid by day. Boone was a dead weight, a man lost in a red, burning fog. Nalinhi did everything. She hunted. She was Apache. She set snares, catching rabbits and ground squirrels, roasting them over tiny, smokeless fires. She found water, a seep in a rock, a muddy spring. She was the scout now. She was the warrior. She was the one who kept them alive. Boone, in his delirium, would wake sometimes, his eyes wild. He would see her dark face over him, and he would recoil, the old ghosts rising. No, he would mutter, no more, no survivors. And she would put her cool hand on his forehead, a hand he had once flinched from. I am Nalini, she would say, her voice calm, a stone in a river. You are Boone. This is Mesha. We are your family. You will not leave us. And the words, your family, would sink into his fever, a balm, a lifeline, and he would sleep. They crossed out of the New Mexico Badlands into a high, wind-swept grassland. The air was thinner, colder. They were running out of food, and their horses were weary. They came upon a small settlement, a collection of sod houses and false-fronted buildings that called itself a town. We have to, Boone whispered. He was sitting up, his back against a rock, his color still a pale, waxy gray, but his fever had broken, and his eyes were clear. We need flour, salt, more ammunition. We will not make it to Colorado without supplies. Nalinhi looked at the town. It was a white man's place. It held nothing but danger. You cannot go. You are too weak. We will go together, he said, his jaw set with a stubbornness she was beginning to recognize. They rode in at midday, Nalinhi on her horse, Boone on his. They were a strange, hard-used sight, a scarred, sick white man, an Apache woman, and a half-white child. The town stopped. Men in front of the saloon, their chairs tilted back, went silent. Their chairs hit the boardwalk with a single, heavy thud. A woman, shaking out a rug, froze, her face a mask of disapproval, and pulled her children inside. Whispers followed them, a poison on the wind. Squaw, half-breed. What is he, a traitor? Nalini kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the space between her horse's ears. She had felt this before. This was the same hate that had closed her mother-in-law's door. But this time, she was not alone. Boone stopped in front of the mercantile. He was weak, and he swayed in the saddle, but he dismounted. He stood on his own 2 feet, his bad leg trembling. He turned and held his arms up. Not to Nalini, to Mesha. Come on, little one, he said, his voice loud enough for the street to hear. Nalinhi handed Mesha down. Boone settled the child on his hip, his left arm, the one on his wounded side, wrapped tight around her. He turned to Nalinhi and held out his other hand. Come, Nalinhi, let's get those supplies. She looked at his outstretched hand. It was a declaration. To her, to the whole staring town. She took his hand. She slid from the horse and stood beside him. They walked into the store together. The storekeeper, a thin man with a stained apron, was behind the counter. He was polishing a glass. He did not look up. We need flour, Boone said, his voice a dry rasp, and cornmeal, salt, and a box of 44 cartridges. The storekeeper kept polishing. "We do not serve her kind." Boone stood very still. Nalini's hand tightened in his. He could feel the eyes of the other men in the store, 2 miners and a farmer, on their backs. "Excuse me?" Boone said. The storekeeper finally looked up, his eyes pale and cold. "You heard me. We are a decent town. We do not sell to squaws, and we surely do not sell to the men who lie with them." Boone felt the old, familiar heat rise in his chest. The rage, the thing that made him pull a trigger. It would be so easy. His pistol was on his hip. He could be that man again. Instead, he pulled Mesha closer. He looked the storekeeper in the eye. "This," he said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the silent room, "is my wife. This," he nodded at Mesha, "is my daughter, and we are just a family, passing through, looking to buy supplies. Now, I will ask you one more time. Will you sell me the flour? Or will I have to ride on to the next town?" The storekeeper looked at the child on Boone's hip. He looked at the hard, unyielding set of Boone's scarred face. He looked at the quiet, lethal dignity of the Apache woman beside him. He saw the pistol on Boone's hip, but he also saw the exhaustion, the sickness, the sheer, stubborn will. He licked his lips. "Flour is $2 a sack," he grumbled, turning to the shelves. "For you." Boone paid in silver from the sheriff's pouch. He and Nalini packed their supplies in silence and walked out. The street was still watching. Boone, his hand still holding Nalini's, his daughter still on his hip, walked them back to the horses. He did not flinch. He did not hurry. He was not a coward. Not anymore. He was standing beside her. They rode out of town, their backs straight. The high country was a trial of a different kind. The air grew sharp, the wind a constant, cutting presence. They were in the mountains now, the high passes that led to Colorado, and the weather turned. What began as a cold rain turned to sleet, and then to a blinding, suffocating blizzard. It came on them with no warning, a wall of white that erased the world. They were in a high pass, the trail a narrow, treacherous thing. "We have to get down," Boone shouted over the shriek of the wind. "Find cover." But there was no cover, only rock and wind, and the dizzying, falling snow. It was Nalini who found it, a dark stain in the white, a hollow in the rock, screened by a stand of near-frozen pine. It was not a cave, it was just a space, an overhang, but it was out of the wind. They fell into it, half-frozen, the horses huddled behind them. Mesha was crying, a thin, terrified sound. Boone was in a bad way. The ride in the cold, the strain. It had been too much. The wound in his side, which had been slowly healing, was now an angry, purple knot. He had pushed his body to its limit, and the limit had broken. By the second day in the shelter, he was burning with fever again. The infection had come back, a poison in his blood. "It is not good, Nalini," he whispered, his teeth chattering, though his skin was on fire. It is bad." "You will not," she said, her voice fierce, as she packed snow into a kettle to melt for water. "You will not leave us. I forbid it." But the wound was festering. It was seeping, and the smell was the smell of death. He was going to die, here, in a frozen hole. At the very edge of the place he had promised them was a new life. Nalini was frantic. She had done everything. She had used the last of the whiskey. She had cleaned it. She had used the last of the clean bandages. She had packed it with herbs she had recognized. But the fever was winning. He was dying. On the third night of the blizzard, he slipped into a coma. His breathing was shallow, a faint, rattling sound. Nalini sat in the darkness, the fire a small, defiant circle of light. She was rocking Mesha, who was cold and hungry and crying, her own small body trembling. Nalini held Boone's hand. It was hot and dry. "Do not she whispered, the tears freezing on her face.
Do not leave me, Boone. You are not allowed. I did not survive all of that to be alone again.
You promised. You promised.
You are her father.
He did not move. Mesha was crying, her wails echoing the winds. Nalini's heart was breaking. She had nothing left, no hope, no strength. Only this. She pulled Mesha close, and she began to sing. She sang in Apache. She sang the lullaby her mother had sung to her, the one she had hummed in Boone's cabin, the one she sang to her daughter to tell her she was safe. It was a song of the high mountains, of the hawk and the pinon, of the strength of the ende. It was the song of her people, the people she no longer had. Her voice was cracked with grief and cold, but it was clear, and it was strong, a thread of life in the howling, white death. She did not know how long she sang. She was lost in it, her voice the only thing left in the world besides the wind. A shadow fell over the entrance of the shelter. Nalini stopped singing, her hand flying to the knife on her belt. She scrambled to her feet, putting herself between the entrance and Boone and Mesha. A figure stood there, bundled in thick furs and blankets, covered in snow. A rifle was in its hand. Lord have mercy, a woman's voice said, thick with a German accent. It was a woman, not a large woman, but sturdy, with a face chapped red by the wind, that was broad and kind and etched with worry. She was not young. She was a settler, her eyes a clear, startled blue.
I heard the singing,
the woman said, lowering her rifle.
I thought it was a wind ghost. My man, Jacob. He says I am crazy, but it was a stimmy, a voice, a mother.
She looked past Nalini. She saw Boone, pale and unmoving by the fire. She saw the sick smell in the small space. She saw the child, her face white and tear-stained.
He is sick,
the woman stated.
He is dying,
Nalini said, her voice raw. Her knife was still in her hand. The woman looked at the knife, then at Nalini's eyes. She nodded, a gesture of understanding.
My name is Martha. My farm is close, a half-mile, in the valley below. The storm, it penned us in, but I heard you.
She looked at Boone.
He has the poison, the fever.
His wound, Nalini said, her voice breaking. Martha stepped forward. She was not afraid. She held out her hand, not for the knife, but for the child. You bring him. I will take the Klein, the little one. We must be quick. Nalini stared at her. This was a white woman, like John's mother, like the woman in the store. She should be full of hate, of fear, but her eyes were just the eyes of a mother who had heard a cry in the night. Nalini made a choice. She handed her daughter, her life, to this stranger. Martha wrapped Mesha in her own thick cloak.
Good. Now, we go. Jacob, my husband. He will help. We will carry him.
It was a blur, a man, Jacob, as large and quiet as Martha was sturdy and bright, appeared. They made a litter from the horse blankets. They carried Boone through the dying blizzard, down into the small, warm valley, to a cabin that smelled of wood smoke and baking bread. They saved him. Martha was a healer. She was a woman from the old country, and she knew poultices and herbs and fevers. She did not just know white man's medicine. She knew the earth. She and Nalini, who had been enemies in any other world, worked side by side, two women with knowing hands. They boiled water. They lanced the wound. They packed it with a hot, stinging poultice of moss and boiled bark. They fed Boone thin broth. For a week, he hung between worlds, but he did not die. The fever broke, and one morning, he opened his eyes, and they were clear. The first thing he saw was Nalini, asleep in a chair by his bed, her hand on his. The second thing he saw was a small, crudely built cradle in the corner, where Mesha was sleeping. Martha and Jacob. who had no children of their own, had kept it in their attic for 30 years. Months passed, the snow melted, and the high country bloomed with a fierce, fast spring. They stayed with Martha and Jacob. Boone, as he recovered, was not idle. He worked. He learned to farm. He and Jacob, two quiet men, understood each other. They mended fences, plowed the small field, and strengthened the barn. Nalinhi worked with Martha. She learned to bake bread, to churn butter, to speak a few words of German. Martha, in turn, learned which roots were for healing and which were for soup. They were two women. They were mothers. It was enough. One evening, Jacob and Boone were sitting on the porch. "That stretch of land," Jacob said, pointing north to a small, green patch by a creek. "It is unclaimed. No one wants it. Too high, too small." Boone looked at it. It was small, but it was theirs for the taking. The story ends not in that borrowed cabin, but in their own. It was not a cabin, not yet. It was a dugout, a sod house built into the side of a hill, by that small creek. It was one room. It was everything. It was a quiet evening, late in the summer. The high mountain air was sweet. Boone, his scar a pale, familiar mark, was in the small corral he had built. He was teaching Mesha to ride. She was 4 years old, a strong, beautiful child with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. She was sitting on the back of the mule, Goliath, who the sheriff had let them keep. Boone was holding her, his large, scarred hands on her small waist, his voice a low, patient rumble as she laughed. Nalinhi was in her garden. It was not a grand garden, just a small patch of turned earth, but it was hers. She was not digging for roots. She was planting seeds, corn, beans, squash, the food of her people, the food of her new life. She pressed a seed into the dark, rich earth, and she felt a peace she had never known. She was not Apache. She was not a white man's squaw. She was just Nalinhi. She was home. She felt him before she saw him. He came up behind her, his shadow falling over her. He had a limp, and the wound in his side still ached when the weather turned, but he was solid. He was her husband. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her head, and together, they watched their daughter ride the mule in a small, perfect circle. They stood like that for a long time, the silence full of everything they had survived. Nalinhi reached up, her hand covering his. "You did not hire me," she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear it. "You saved me, even when you did not know you wanted to." Boone held her tighter. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her, the smell of the earth, the sound of his daughter's laughter. He was not a ghost. He was alive. "You saved me first," he answered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please, feel free to comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, I hope you will subscribe to From Wild West so you do not miss another tale. And finally, please share your thoughts on the story of Nalinhi and Boone. I would be grateful to read what you think, in English,